cameras had just rolled back to life, the bright Family Feud studio lights bouncing off polished floors and the shiny smiles of contestants. The Collins family stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the giant board, trying to look relaxed. The crowd buzzed, the theme music faded, and Steve Harvey, crisp suit and wide grin, held his cue cards like a man born for the stage. It was supposed to be just another Thursday afternoon taping in March 2024. 2 families, 5 rounds, quick jokes, laughter, maybe a few awkward answers that would go viral later. But not that day. That day, something entirely different waited just beyond the lights. Madison Collins, 22, stood at the far right end of her family line. She looked the part. Polite smile, confident posture, the kind of contestant producers loved. But if anyone had looked close enough, they'd have seen her hands trembling. It wasn't from nerves about the game. It was something else. A secret she'd carried like a stone in her chest for 15 years. She kept glancing at her phone, tucked between cue cards and the buzzer, checking the time as if she were waiting for something that might never come. Her grandmother Dorothy, standing beside her, gave her a reassuring pat. "Smile, sugar. Your mama would be proud," she whispered. Madison nodded, forcing a grin. Her mama, gone since she was 9. Her father, locked away even longer. Only Grandma Dorothy knew the full weight of that history. When Steve Harvey walked to their podium for the next question, the audience erupted with applause. His presence filled the room, warm, commanding, familiar. He cracked a joke about the previous round, drew laughter from both families, and readied his next card. "All right, we surveyed 100 people," he began, his deep voice echoing off the set. And then quietly, almost too softly to catch, "Mr. Harvey?" Madison's voice broke through. At first, Steve didn't hear it. He was still halfway through the question, but the tremor in her tone stopped him mid-sentence. He looked up, eyebrows knitting. "Excuse me, sweetheart," he said gently. Madison swallowed hard. Her lips trembled as she spoke again. "Mr. Harvey, I haven't seen my father in 15 years. The studio froze. Cameras kept rolling, but no one breathed. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Steve blinked, taken aback. "Your father?" She nodded, tears threatening to spill. He's been in prison since I was 7. Her voice cracked on the last word. For a moment there was nothing but silence, a kind of reverent, stunned quiet that blanketed the room. Steve lowered his cue card slowly. He had hosted thousands of contestants, thousands of families with their quirks and backstories, but never had someone peeled back their heart like this, right there under the lights. "Come here, baby girl," he said softly. The crowd stayed hushed as he stepped closer, lowering his mic. Madison took a shaky breath. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to tell you." Her grandmother turned, confused, whispering her name, but Madison pressed on, as if years of silence had suddenly broken loose. "He's been gone my whole life. He made a mistake, and he's paying for it. But I've been trying to help him. I can't do it alone anymore." Steve motioned to pause filming. Producers exchanged bewildered looks from behind the cameras, but Steve Harvey was no stranger to real emotion. He knew when a moment deserved to live. He leaned in, voice low. "What happened, sweetheart?" Madison closed her eyes, gathering herself. "My mom got sick when I was 7. Cancer. We were about to lose the house. Dad, he robbed a convenience store. He didn't hurt anybody, Mr. Harvey, but it was his 3rd strike. They gave him 20 years. Her words came out like broken glass. Sharp, painful, unstoppable. Steve's face softened. He nodded slowly, letting her speak. "And your mother?" he asked quietly. "She passed 2 years later," Madison whispered. "She never saw him again. Grandma raised me and my brother Tyler. She cleaned houses, worked double shifts, did everything. She saved us." Dorothy stood beside her, tears now rolling freely down her cheeks. Steve rested a hand on Madison's shoulder. "You been carrying all that by yourself?" She nodded. "I was angry for a long time," she said. "Angry at him, angry at life. But I started studying criminal justice. I want to help people like him, people who made mistakes but still deserve a second chance. The audience began to stir. Sniffles, whispers, the rustle of tissues. Behind the cameras, a producer silently gestured to let the tape keep rolling. Steve Harvey straightened his jacket, voice rich but trembling slightly. "You got a lot of courage, young lady," he said. "I've met preachers and politicians who couldn't stand here and tell that truth like you just did." He looked over at the audience. "This right here, this is real." Madison smiled weakly, wiping a tear. "Thank you, Mr. Harvey," she said. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I guess I wanted someone to know that he's not a bad man." Steve nodded. "I believe you, sweetheart. And maybe there's more to this story than you realize." He said it almost like a prophecy. Then turning to the crew, "Let's take a short break." As the music faded out, Steve walked back toward Madison's side, his usual quick stride replaced by something slower, thoughtful. He'd seen thousands of contestants over the years, but something in her eyes, that mixture of fear and hope, wouldn't let him go. She reminded him of his own daughters, how fragile and fierce they could be at once. He placed a hand on her shoulder again. "You hang tight, Madison. Sometimes when you speak your truth, God starts moving pieces you don't even know about." The cameras cut, but the energy didn't fade. In the crowd, people were still wiping tears. On the monitors, producers replayed the moment again and again. The whisper that had stopped the show. And somewhere in a small Georgia prison cell an hour away, a man named Robert Collins sat staring at a faded photograph of his daughter, the same one she kept tucked in her phone case, completely unaware that the next time he saw her face, the world would be watching. When filming resumed, the air in the studio felt heavier, charged with something that couldn't quite be named. Steve Harvey's usual rhythm, the easy banter, the playful jokes, seemed softer now, slower, almost reverent. The Collins family stood a little closer together, their smiles more real this time. Madison had wiped her tears, but her eyes still shimmered, red at the edges. Steve had told her, "You play this game with your heart, not just your mind," and something in that sentence had shifted the entire energy of the room. As the next round began, Steve turned to Madison and asked with a half smile, "You ready, sweetheart?" She nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." The board lit up. "Name something people do when they miss someone." Madison didn't hesitate. "Write letters," she said softly. The audience murmured. There was something about the way she said it, not as a guess, but as a confession. Steve nodded slowly. "Good answer," he said, pressing the buzzer. Ding! Number 2 on the board. The Collins family erupted with cheers, but Madison's gaze was far away. She was remembering the box of letters her grandmother had kept, the ones her father sent every week for 5 years, even when she stopped writing back. The round continued. "Name a place where people find peace," Steve read next. Madison's lips parted before she could think. "Prison chapel," she said, then froze. A hush fell over the audience. She quickly corrected herself. "I mean, church." But it was too late. The word hung in the air, fragile and raw. Steve gave a small nod, his eyes meeting hers with quiet understanding. "That's all right, baby girl. Ain't no wrong answers here, just honest ones." The buzzer sounded again, another correct response. The crowd applauded, but this time the cheers felt different, warmer, protective, like the audience had silently adopted her. "Name something that takes courage," Steve continued. Madison hesitated, her eyes flickering between the lights and the floor. "Forgiveness," she whispered. Steve didn't press the button immediately. He just looked at her, the studio lights reflecting off the tears she tried so hard to hide. "Now that," he said finally, "is the best answer I've heard all season." The buzzer lit up with a perfect score. The room erupted. Madison smiled, really smiled this time, for the first time since the show began. But behind the cameras, the producers were whispering. Something strange was happening. The executive producer, Marcus Freeman, had just received a message from a Georgia number flagged as urgent. He excused himself from the control room and stepped outside to take the call. When he returned, his face was pale. He didn't go back to his booth. He walked straight to Steve, who was now preparing the family for the final round. "Steve," Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried just enough to be picked up by the mics. "I need you to take this call." Steve looked puzzled. "Right now? We're in the middle of fast money." Marcus nodded firmly. "Trust me, it can't wait." The crowd fell silent again. You could hear the faint hum of the stage lights, the creak of the podium as Steve set his cards down. "Who's calling me?" he asked. Marcus handed him a phone, his expression unreadable. "Governor's office," he said simply. The reaction rippled through the audience like electricity. Steve blinked, unsure if this was some elaborate prank. "Hello?" he said cautiously into the phone. The voice on the other end was calm, official, unmistakably real. "Mr. Harvey, this is the office of Governor Brian Kemp, calling from Atlanta. We understand you have a contestant named Madison Collins on your show right now." Steve's gaze darted to Madison. She looked frozen, one hand clutching her grandmother's arm. "Yes, sir," Steve said slowly. "She's right here with us. Mr. Harvey, we need to inform her, and you, about her father, Robert Collins. There has been a development in his case." The room went utterly still. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Madison's face drained of color. She took a step forward. Is he okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Steve raised a hand gently, as if to calm both her and himself. "Is Mr. Collins all right?" he repeated into the phone. The voice replied, steady and formal. "He's fine, Mr. Harvey. In fact, he's more than fine. Earlier this morning, the Georgia Innocence Project filed an emergency appeal. New evidence, a security video that was never shown during the original trial, was reviewed by the governor's office. It proved that Mr. Collins never threatened anyone and that the weapon used was not loaded." Gasps rippled across the audience. Madison's knees buckled slightly. Dorothy caught her, whispering, "Lord, have mercy." The voice continued. "Given the new findings and the prosecutorial errors uncovered, Governor Kemp has signed a commutation order effective immediately. Robert Collins' sentence has been reduced to time served. He's being released today." Steve's eyes widened. He turned toward Madison, who was now shaking uncontrollably. "Are you saying he's coming home?" "Yes, sir," the voice said. "But there's more. Mr. Collins doesn't yet know his daughter's been working on his case. He doesn't know she found the evidence, or that she's been fighting for him behind the scenes. We thought, given she's here today, this might be the right moment." Madison's breath hitched. The audience could see her hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down. "Where is he?" Steve asked, his voice unsteady. "He's on his way to your studio," the voice replied. 30 minutes out. We'd like to bring him directly to the stage." Steve didn't hesitate. He turned to his producer. "Then we're waiting? No more filming. No schedule, no rules. We wait for that man." The audience erupted in applause. Some stood, others cried. The Collins family clung to each other, disbelief and joy crashing together in waves too big to contain. The studio became a living heartbeat. Stage hands whispered updates. The band stopped playing. Even the audience refused to leave. Madison sat trembling beside her grandmother, clutching Steve's hand like it was the only solid thing in the world. He leaned close and said softly, "Baby girl, sometimes God don't just move mountains. He brings the mountain straight to you." 30 minutes stretched like forever. Cameras stayed rolling, though no one cared about the show anymore. Madison's mind raced with memories. Her father lifting her onto his shoulders at the county fair, teaching her how to whistle, reading bedtime stories in voices that made her laugh until she cried. Then the visit stopped, and silence grew like walls between them. Now those walls were about to fall. Finally, the stage manager whispered, "He's here." Steve stood, heart pounding. The crowd rose with him, sensing that something holy was about to unfold. Madison's breath came in shallow bursts. She looked toward the entrance, her hands trembling again. But this time, they weren't from fear. The doors at the edge of the stage began to open, and for the first time in 15 years, a father who thought the world had forgotten him was about to walk into the light. The studio doors creaked open, and for a moment the light from the hallway flooded in, a pale beam that seemed to slice through years of pain. Everyone turned toward it, their breath caught in collective anticipation. Steve Harvey lowered his microphone. Madison rose to her feet, trembling. The audience fell utterly silent. It wasn't the silence of television suspense. It was reverence, like they were witnessing something sacred. Then a figure appeared in the doorway, tall, cautious, blinking against the brightness of the studio. Robert Collins stepped into view. He looked older than his 52 years, his once dark hair now streaked with silver. His face bore the marks of hard time, fine lines, sunken cheeks, a stoic expression that only those who've lived through long confinement wear. His clothes were simple, prison-release jeans, a faded shirt a size too large. But his eyes, when they adjusted to the lights, were wide with confusion and something deeper. Fear that this was some kind of mistake. Steve walked a few steps toward him, voice low, steady. "Mr. Collins," he said. "Sir, do you know where you are right now?" Robert blinked, scanning the crowd, the cameras, the bright red Family Feud logo behind Steve. "They told me. I had to come here," he said slowly. "I thought maybe someone was hurt. My daughter, my mama." His voice trailed off. "They wouldn't tell me anything." Madison was frozen in place, her hands clasped over her mouth, tears streaming down unchecked. Steve turned to her gently. "Madison," he said, "you ready, baby?" She nodded weakly. Her voice barely worked. "Is it really him?" "It's him," Steve whispered, his own throat tightening. Then softly, "Turn around, daughter." The moment she turned, the world seemed to stop. Madison saw him, the man she'd last seen through a pane of thick glass at age 15, older now but still unmistakably her father. Robert's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Madison broke, running across the stage with a cry that tore through the silence. "Daddy!" Robert staggered as she crashed into his arms, her sobs muffled against his chest. For a second he looked as though he might collapse, his arms trembling before wrapping around her, holding her tight, tighter than the prison walls had ever allowed him to hold anything. The audience was on their feet. Even the crew members behind the cameras wiped their eyes. Steve stood a few feet back, his hands clasped, letting the moment breathe. "I'm so sorry," Madison cried into his shirt. "I'm sorry I stopped writing. I'm sorry I didn't visit. I was angry, Daddy. I was so angry." Robert's voice cracked, rough and trembling. "No, baby girl. No, you don't ever apologize for that. You had a life to live. I'm the one who's sorry. I'm sorry for every birthday I missed, every school play, every time you needed me there." He tilted her chin up, his own tears falling freely. "But look at you. You grew up. You did good, didn't you?" Madison laughed through her tears, nodding. "I tried. I really tried." Dorothy came forward next, her frail hands covering her mouth as she whispered, "My boy." She reached him, and he bent low, wrapping her in a hug that looked like it could mend all the years between them. "Mama, you held my family together," he said. "You kept my babies safe. I can never repay that." Dorothy shook her head. "Just being here is enough, son. Just being free." Steve cleared his throat gently, stepping closer. His voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it. "Mr. Collins, there's something your daughter wants to tell you." Robert looked from Steve to Madison, still trying to process the reality around him. Madison took his hands, gripping them tightly. "Dad," she said, 3 months ago I hired a lawyer. I've been working with the Georgia Innocence Project. We found a video from the store. It proved what you always said. The gun wasn't loaded. You didn't hurt anybody." Robert stared at her, eyes wide. "What? What did you just say?" "I used my college fund," Madison said, her words spilling fast through tears. "I worked 3 jobs, Grandma helped, Uncle James helped. We paid for the appeal, and they listened, Dad. They finally listened. You're free. For good." Robert's mouth opened, but no sound came. His knees buckled. Steve and Madison both caught him as he dropped to the floor, overwhelmed. The studio gasped, then fell silent again. "I'm free," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm really free?" "You're free, Daddy," Madison sobbed. "You're coming home." The crowd erupted in applause, not the kind meant for television, but the kind born of genuine human emotion. Even the camera operators clapped through tears. Steve's face was streaked, his voice hoarse when he spoke again. Ladies and gentlemen, this right here is why I do what I do. He turned to the audience. You are watching forgiveness happen. You are watching what it looks like when love wins. Robert stood, his hands shaking, and turned toward Steve. Mr. Harvey, I don't know how to thank you. Steve shook his head, wiping his eyes. You don't thank me, sir. You thank that woman right there. She didn't give up on you. Madison smiled through tears. I just wanted you home, Dad. That's all I ever wanted. Robert took her hand, kissed her forehead. You gave me my life back, baby girl. You didn't just free me from prison. You freed me from shame. The family came together in a tight circle. Dorothy, Madison, Tyler, Uncle James, Aunt Patricia, and the audience cheered louder than any final round victory ever had. For a long moment, Steve just stood there, watching, a single line echoing in his mind. Sometimes the prize ain't on the board. When the applause finally faded, Steve raised the mic again. Mr. Collins, he said, your family's been through enough, so we're changing the rules today. Both families win. You hear me? Everybody's a winner. The audience roared. Robert laughed through tears, shaking his head in disbelief. Madison hugged him again, whispering, You're going to see me graduate, Dad. Front row. And for the first time in 15 years, Robert Collins laughed. A full, unbroken laugh that sounded like sunlight after rain. Cameras captured it all, but no lens could capture what it felt like in that room. A studio turned sanctuary, a show turned miracle, and a broken family made whole again under the brightest lights in America. 3 months had passed since that unforgettable day at the Family Feud studio. The day when the lights stopped being just lights and became symbols of grace. But for Madison Collins, time still felt suspended in a kind of dream. Every morning she woke up expecting to hear the clang of a cell door in her memory, to remember that her father was still behind bars. Yet every morning, when she walked down the hallway and saw him standing at the stove in their grandmother's kitchen, humming to the rhythm of the frying pan, she was reminded that miracles didn't always come with thunder. Sometimes they came dressed in quiet, ordinary mornings. Robert Collins had gained a little weight since his release. His face had softened, his eyes no longer haunted but peaceful, and there was a lightness in the way he moved. Like every breath of air was borrowed from heaven. He'd taken to waking early, cooking breakfast for the family. The first week home, he'd cried peeling potatoes because he hadn't touched a real knife in 15 years. Now he cooked eggs and biscuits as if each meal were a prayer. When Madison came into the kitchen one morning wearing her cap and gown, he froze mid-turn, spatula in hand. Don't you move, he said, his voice catching. Let me look at you. Madison blushed, smiling. Dad? He shook his head, tears already welling. You look like your mama, he whispered. Same smile, same eyes. She'd be so proud. Dorothy, sitting at the table with her cup of tea, nodded quietly. She's watching, Robert. She's been watching this whole time. The house was full again. Laughter in the corners, footsteps in the hallways, the sound of a family that had learned to breathe together again. Tyler had turned 18 and gotten accepted into college. He wanted to study law, inspired by his sister's fight for justice. Dorothy called them her second chance babies. Later that afternoon, they all drove together to Georgia State University. The graduation field stretched before them, a sea of caps, gowns, and proud families holding cameras and flowers. But when Madison walked across that stage, her moment was different. The crowd saw just another graduate, but those who knew her story, those who had seen that Family Feud episode, knew they were witnessing something sacred. The camera panned across the front row, where Robert Collins sat in a crisp navy suit, his hands clasped in prayer. His lips moved silently as his daughter's name echoed through the speakers. Madison Grace Collins, magna cum laude. The applause that followed was thunderous. Madison took her diploma with trembling hands, turned to the crowd, and locked eyes with her father. He was crying openly, unashamed. When she stepped off the stage, she walked straight toward him, holding the diploma between them. This is yours too, Dad, she said. We earned this together. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might vanish. "No," he said softly. "You did this. You carried the light when I couldn't even see it." Madison smiled, tears streaming. "You taught me to fight. Even from behind bars you did." Steve Harvey had invited them back onto his talk show for a follow-up segment. When they walked out on stage, the audience gave them a standing ovation. Robert looked different now. Healthy, strong, the faint prison gray gone from his face. Steve hugged him like an old friend. "How's freedom treating you, Mr. Collins?" he asked. Robert chuckled. "Mr. Harvey, every morning I wake up and I can walk outside. I can feel the sun on my face without asking permission. I can drive my son to school. I can make breakfast for my family. I don't think I'll ever take those things for granted again." "And work?" Steve asked, smiling. "The Harvey Foundation helped me get a job at a construction firm," Robert said proudly. "They specialize in hiring men with records. I'm learning new skills, making honest money. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can take care of my family again." The audience applauded. Madison added, "And he comes to my classes sometimes. My professors let him sit in on my lectures. He shares his story with the students. He tells them what it's like to lose everything and to get it back." Steve's expression softened. "And you, Madison? You're graduating, right?" "Yes, sir," she said, smiling through tears. "And this time, my dad's front row." Tyler spoke up from the couch. "And I'm going to college, too. I want to study law. Maybe work with the Innocence Project one day." The audience gasped and clapped again. Steve shook his head in disbelief. "You know what I love about this family?" he said. "You could have let anger eat you alive. You could have turned bitter, but you chose forgiveness. You chose love. You chose to believe in second chances. And that's how the world changes." Robert reached over and took Madison's hand. "Mr. Harvey," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just give us money or help. You gave us a moment to heal. That's something I'll carry to my grave." The audience rose again, tears streaming, some holding hands. Steve wiped his own eyes and said, "You showed the world what redemption looks like." Then he turned to the cameras, his voice deep and reflective. "If you're watching this right now, remember this family. Remember that sometimes the hardest battles end in the quietest victories. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom." Months later, the Collins family appeared again in the local news. Robert had started volunteering at a community center for men recently released from prison. Madison had enrolled in graduate school. Tyler had gotten his first internship at a legal aid office. Dorothy, frail but glowing, often said that she could finally sleep without nightmares. "God took his time," she'd say, "but he never forgot us." One summer evening, long after the cameras and headlines had faded, Madison and her father sat together on the porch. The sun was setting low, painting the Georgia sky in gold and crimson. The air was quiet except for the sound of cicadas. Robert leaned back, watching the horizon. "You know," he said softly, 15 years in that place. I thought I'd lost everything. But I didn't lose you. You were just waiting for me to find my way back." Madison smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "We both were," she whispered. And as the last light of day faded into the calm of evening, Robert Collins finally felt what he'd been chasing his whole life. Peace. The kind that doesn't come from a courtroom or a governor's order, but from the simple miracle of being home, surrounded by love, knowing that redemption, once found, never leaves again.